Hey there. Welcome back to White River Homestead. I'm Shy. So glad you're here today. So in this video, I'm going to tell you how I think you should get started with gardening. I believe anybody can have a garden in any space you're in. So we're going to talk about if you want to start a garden this year, what's the simplest, easiest, basic steps to get started. And we're going to do it from start to finish. So if that interests you, let's go. So I'm going to be working on doing some up potting here while I talk to you. But I'm just going to kind of give you the step-by-step that way. So if you're wanting to start a garden, the first few things you need to think about is your budget. Do you have a lot of money to spend? Do you need to keep it minimal? Figure out what you're willing to spend on your garden. Once you figure out your budget, then you need to figure out your last frost dates. And you can do that by going to the Farmer's Almanac. Just Google Farmer's Almanac, last frost date, and your zip code. And that will tell you when your last frost date is, and you're free to plant after that. A lot of you are probably already past your last frost date, but if you're like me, we haven't made it there yet. So for that, don't plant anything out before your last frost date, because then it could kill it and you just wasted all that money. So the last thing I want to say before we get into the steps is I personally believe that there is no wrong way to garden. There might be things that don't work. You might try to grow something that's not available in your zone, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. It just doesn't work. So experimentation is one of my favorite things to do in the garden, because you're never going to know if it works or not unless you try it yourself. There's several people that have said, oh, don't do this, don't do that. Why not? Go ahead and give it a try. If it fails, you personally know that it failed. So I do not believe there's any wrong way to garden. There's just things that won't work. So keep that in mind. When you're wanting to try something new, it might not work. It might not work in the way you intended it to, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. So keep that in mind. So if you're wanting to start a garden, I would say the first thing you need to do is figure out, what do you want to grow? What do you want to grow in your garden? And the reason I say that is because a lot of people go gung-ho trying to get the biggest and the baddest and the best stuff, when in reality, they only want to grow cucumbers, or they only want to grow a couple of pepper plants. You need to figure out what you want to grow, so then you can figure out how you want to grow it. And the way I recommend you decide what you're going to grow is think about, when you go to the grocery store, what produce do you buy? Do you tend to buy tomatoes? Do you tend to buy peppers? What's your family going to eat? You don't need to go growing stuff just because it's available. If your family's not going to eat it, that just defeats the whole purpose there. So what I did, last year was my first year gardening, and this is exactly how I started. So what I did is next time I went to the grocery, I looked at what was on my list. What was I going to the grocery to buy? Peppers, absolutely. Tomatoes, cucumbers. I knew which veggies we would eat, and I knew which veggies my other family members, my mom, my dad, my mother-in-law, and Lair's whole family, I kind of knew what vegetables they liked, so if we had extra, I could send it to them. So I made my list. After I made that list, the next thing you need to do is you need to figure out, how do you want to grow your garden? And when I say how, I'm talking about, do you want to just grow it in the ground? Do you want to put them in raised beds? Do you have the space to go as big as you can? Or are you living somewhere where you have this little patio that can barely fit 2 people? And if that's the case, you'd want to go with some container gardening. So you need to figure out what combination. I personally went with raised beds last year for my first year. Loved it. I absolutely love my raised beds. I also have a Ruth Stout bed, and I'm going to do a video on that here soon too. I got a green stalk this year. If you don't know what a green stalk is, you can check out my video all about the green stalk. It's really cool. It's a vertical gardening system. And so that's really good for people that are on patios or don't have a lot of growing space. You can grow a lot of stuff in a green stalk. So once you determine how, so you know what you want to grow, you know how you want to grow it. Once you determine those things, then you need to figure out where. And that kind of goes with how, but where do you want your garden to be? If you're like me, we had quite a bit of land. We have about 1 acre, so I had a lot of different options. But one thing you want to look at is the sunlight. Gardens do need a lot of sunlight. So if it's a fully shaded area, you're not really going to be able to grow tomatoes and peppers and the things that need the sun. So you need to think about that when you're deciding where do you want to put it. Look at the sunlight, look at the soil. Do you have an area that floods a lot? Well, you're not going to want to put your garden in an area that floods a lot. So look at all of those. So we figured out what we're going to grow, how we're going to grow it, and where we're going to grow it. You have the idea in your head, you know, hey, I'm growing these plants, this is where I'm going to put them, but now what do I do? So that's when I say you go and you buy your supplies. And that's going to depend on what your growing method is. In our case, we had to find lumber to build our beds. We got lucky, and our neighbors were tearing down their deck, so they gave us all their old scrap lumber, and we built our beds out of that. And out of a cedar tree that we had cut down when we purchased the property, we had it planed into planks and built some out of that. So we got lucky, but you can always find repurposed materials. If you're growing in containers, you're going to need to have the containers, whether that's something you have around, that's something you have to go buy. 5-gallon buckets, you can grow so much in 5-gallon buckets, it's insane. So maybe you have to go buy a few of those. You're going to need soil, whether that's filling the containers, whether that's tilling your yard, whether that's filling your beds. In our case, our beds are done with a layer of like old rotting wood and branches, and then topsoil, and then compost, and then straw mulch. But it just depends on what you're doing and how you're going to fill it. Once you get all of that figured out, you're going to need your plants. And I do have a video on here about starting from seed. I don't recommend doing that your first year. And the reason I don't recommend that is because it can be tricky, and it can also be tough to start your own seeds. And I don't want first-time gardeners getting stuck trying to grow seeds and then just giving up on gardening. So I recommend head to your local, if you have a local nursery, a local greenhouse, head there and pick up some starts. They almost always have tomatoes and peppers and the basics. You don't have to get anything fancy. If you don't have any local nurseries or greenhouses, you could always go to Lowe's or Home Depot or whatever your big box store is, farm stores. This time of year, you can find starts just about anywhere. And just go and buy those. Farmers markets normally have a lot of those too. And go buy some. Buy whatever starts you need. I personally would wait until after your last frost date. That way you know you can go buy them and then plant them. You don't have to try to keep them in your house or anything like that. So you have your soil, wherever you're growing them at. Now you have your plants. Your next step is to plant them. So a lot of people will tell you, well, make sure you do proper spacing. Make sure this, make sure that. This goes back to my rule of you cannot garden wrong. Are there more efficient ways that you can do stuff? Absolutely. You absolutely can. But for first-time gardeners, I want your #1 goal to be to grow wisdom. That was my #1 goal last year, and I far exceeded that. I mean, I learned so much in my first year gardening, and you'll see a lot of other people say, you learned so much in 1 year of gardening. And I was thinking, there's no way. There's no way I'm going to learn that much. I learned so much. So I want your goal for your first year of gardening, and every year, to be to grow wisdom. If that's your goal, you'll do great. So experiment. If you want to look up how to space tomato plants, how to space this, how to space that, great. I 100% support that, but you don't have to. You can try it. Worst case, you plant stuff too close together. Now you know for next year. You don't have to worry about that. So once you get your stuff planted wherever you want it and however you want it, then it just comes down to maintaining it. You want to make sure there's no weeds around in the beds. You want to make sure that it's watered properly. If you have rain coming, great. If not, you're going to have to water it. There's so much more tips and tricks that I could tell you, but it's just kind of stuff that you learn with research over time. I'll have a few videos coming up here soon once we get the garden planted about how I water and how we fertilize and all that. But as a beginner gardener, none of that is important. The important thing is start small, get some stuff in the ground, grow food, because then once you grow food for the first time, you're hooked and you can take off from there. Now, let's say you really do want to research. I'm a researcher. I'm 100% a researcher, and I dove in and researched the heck out of it, and I enjoy that. So I want to give you a few resources if you want to look into them that you can definitely check out. So obviously YouTube. YouTube is where I learned to garden, period. If I have a question, I take it to YouTube. If I can't find the answer on YouTube, then I go to Facebook groups. I'm in a few Facebook groups that are local to my area, to Indiana, kind of more narrowed down to the things that we do here. But then I'm also in some big Facebook groups with gardeners around the world. And so that helps a lot. I'm in a bug group. So when I find pests in my garden, and I'm like, what the heck is this thing? Google can't tell me. I can post in this bug group, and these people will know how it's born, where it came from, where it goes, and all the information I need. So Facebook groups are a really great resource to have. Some other resources are the Farmer's Almanac. I love the Farmer's Almanac. I have an actual physical copy, but you can also just thefarmersalmanac.com. They do articles on how to grow this, how to grow that. It's so much information, but the biggest things with that is your average last frost date and your average first frost date. Those are some of the most important things the Farmer's Almanac will tell you. And then last but not least is a book called Beginner Gardeners, I think. But it's by Jessica Sowards. She's the Roots and Refuge Farm YouTuber. If you don't follow them, definitely check them out. That's how I learned to garden. But her book is absolutely incredible. You can find it on Amazon. The link is in our Amazon store in the description. But it literally breaks down step by step how to garden. And she taught me how to garden via YouTube, so the book is exactly what she teaches you, condensed down. It's a really quick read. There's a lot of pictures and a lot of context, and she really breaks it down for you. So it's an awesome book. I definitely recommend that. And I mean, talk to your peers. Find other people that grow food around you and figure out what works for them and what doesn't work for them. And ultimately just make your goal to grow wisdom, because if you're always learning, then you'll be good to go. And remember, I don't believe you can garden in any wrong way. You can't. There are things that won't work, but that doesn't make it wrong. So I really hope this helps you start your garden. If you have any questions, definitely comment them below. I really want to get people into the love of gardening, and I really want to show them how easy and simple it is. I hope you guys are having a wonderful day, and go check out my green stalk video. I'll talk to you guys later. As always, cultivate originality.